Aloha everyone, I'm Julia. I'm the Chief Guide over here at the SoHAD. I'm joined today by two of the Wise Guides, B.
Hello.
And Christina.
Hello.
Today's topic is about sitting in, and it's a follow-on from our previous conversation. But before we get started in the guide room, we always do our protocol. And so we're going to ask Wise Guide B to get us started on that.
Yes, so we had some troubles with the rattle, so I think we're trying the drum today instead.
Thank you, sister. We did have a little bit of trouble hearing that again in or out, but it's still the essence of what that sound is about. That's really lovely to experience in the space. I'd ask everybody to just focus on their breath and feel the movement of the breath very gently. Just absorbing the sound of the drum or the essence of the drum if you didn't hear it. Feel it with your body. I'm just going to take the next step in our protocol with a pule, which is a prayer. Na akua, na o makua, na paikahiko, aloha mahalo. Aloha kako, aloha ka ua, aloha mai. E molokai nui ahina, e papahana moku e na kupuna o garigo, aloha e mahalo. Aloha na akua, mahalo na akua. We mahalo you na akua for this time once again coming together in deep conversation with each other and with you. Na akua, at this time we ask you to bring us into that center, into that connection and into that essence of the mana, the spiritual energy of our ancestors. And to help guide our conversation, Na'akua, to explore this topic of sitting in and what it actually means when we're sitting and what it is we're actually sitting in and with. We would love your guidance, Na'akua, on this. And so we ask for that to flow freely into this space, into our hearts, into our minds, into our hearing, into our listening, into our experiencing. We ask you, Na'akua, to put your protection around us here in the guide room and all who are listening to this conversation. We ask you to shield us from the prying eyes and ears of the kolohe and the kepelo. And we ask you, Na'akua, to please take our request and our intention around this conversation today, and however you take it, in whatever direction you take it in, Na'akua, we ask you to send our request out, take it wherever it needs to go in its entirety. And we send it to you with these words. E amama, e amama, e amama. Let it fly. Mahalo Na'akua. Thank you, everybody. We're going to start off this conversation today, and B's going to get us going, and from there we'll just see where it takes us. So remember, we're exploring today in conversation the idea of sitting in and sitting in it, whatever it may be.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. So I really sat with it all week because it's something that we've done for so many years that to explain it was actually quite tricky. So there was layers and layers and layers to it. And then I started the Lunar Ho'oponopono training at SoHAD yesterday. And the conversation was brought to the importance of pronouncing words in the right way and the energy these words are holding, you know, how they have been passed on from generations to generations orally. And so the energy of that word and the pronunciation of it is really important as well. And that made me think, I wonder what the meaning behind the word sit actually is. And so I looked into it, and then there's obviously the sit that all of us know, which is being in a position in which one's weight is supported by one's buttocks. So we all do that every day. And I do it, a lot of it every day through to my job. But that's not quite the sitting that we are really looking for. So I looked a bit deeper into it, and then there was an explanation of to remain in a particular position or state, which spoke more to the sitting that we are talking about. There is a way in which something, like I replaced it with something, it was referred to an item of clothing, but in our case, a way in which something fits someone. Certain thoughts, certain emotions, when you sit with something, how does it fit with you? How does it fit within you? The abbreviation of sit, S-I-T, is stay in touch, which I thought was beautiful as well. As in that sitting, you're trying to stay in touch, what unfolds and what presents itself. And then I looked further into it, and I found that the origin of the name sit comes from the Germanic language. Sit, as in sitzen in German, has its roots in Latin, sedere, which means to sit beside. And that originally related to an official who assists a judge. And then when I read more into it, there was the sitting related to the king on his throne, that privilege of sitting, which is still presents itself in our governments these days, the seat in a parliament. The importance to show respect or etiquette in offering an honorable guest a seat, or a gentleman that might pull out a seat for a woman and help her to sit. The gesture in that I found beautiful as well. And even if you go even further back into our ancient cultures and indigenous cultures, they would sit in a circle. They would sit in sacred ceremony. They would sit in a council with elders. And that's just to name a few. So all of those added then to the energy of sitting actually. So if you look back, remaining in a particular position or in a particular state, a way which something fits, the abbreviation of stay in touch, sitting is as a great privilege, like, you know, the throne or parliament, a gesture of honor, a showing respect to a special guest, or sitting in sacred ceremony. And I think all of those feed into the sitting that we are talking about. And I'm sure Christina and you, Julia, will have more to add to that. And I'm hoping that everybody that listens to that will do his own sitting and add to that energy and meaning of that word in his own way. That's just what I found, and that what spoke to me. And then there's the different layers of what within yourself are you sitting. You know, we all say quite easily, oh, I have to sit with that. And often that's more a mental sort of sitting with it. You think about an idea, you test yourself out in all these different areas, see how you feel if you leave the job or go into the new job, but like that sitting with it mentally, we chew it over. Then there's the sitting with it emotionally, which which I really refer to a lot in my own process. An emotion might come up, and it's not about the story behind that emotion, but you're just sitting with that emotion and finding the courage to allow yourself to feel it as much as you're capable at that point of time. And that's where the leaning into came from as well. Like sometimes I literally physically lean into that energy of that emotion until it is at a point where it's like, that's as much as I can take right now, and just sit with that emotion. There's sometimes not even much more that needs to be done. There's process just in getting to know that energy. For me personally, there's the physical aspect, which I'm really interested to hear more about, Christina, where you sit with a pain or an uncomfort or anything in your body. And then there's the spiritual way of sitting with it. You know, you can sit down, bring to a sacred ceremony what you are sitting with, and process it while you are doing your ritual or your prayers. So there's many, many layers of it, and we probably could talk much longer than half an hour about it, but yeah, they are sort of the aspects that I sort of started to fall into as I was sitting with it.
It's very interesting. I'm really grateful for Julia challenging us last week and saying,
Yeah.
well, what does that even mean when you're trying to process or do? I think the conversation started around how you do your inner work, and we kind of went, oh, well, we just lean in or we sit with it. It's like, and Julia went, no, what does that actually mean? So like you, Bea, I've been contemplating the process that I go through. And I ended up with the same paradigm that you've just talked through, which is there's a physical, spiritual, emotional and mental, intellectual aspect to it. And sometimes one informs the other, and other times the other informs the other. There are occasions when I, in the context of doing your inner process, there are times when I'm clueless about the emotion because I don't want to look, and it comes out in my body in a pain. So then I have to go into the physical part of my body and ask that, what is the emotion? Emotions are tricky too. Often if I'm triggered, the immediate presenting emotion is not where the contemplation has to happen. Often the immediate presenting, if I'm triggered and I kind of go, okay, I got to stop. I acknowledge I'm being triggered. What emotion am I feeling? How do I access that emotion? And initially it'll be, I'm angry, or whatever it is, or it's your fault. And the longer you sit with it, there I am again. The more you allow that process, and the more you are honest with yourself, and that's really hard, really hard. The more honest you are with yourself about what is the underlying emotion that triggered you, the greater your ability to let it pass or work your way through it. That's just my experience. Emotions can be tricksters sometimes. So being vulnerable with yourself, I think, is one of the most precious and yet challenging things that you can do.
Yeah.
And often for me, initially the presenting emotion will come up, and it's like, it's all his fault if he didn't speak to me that way, or if he didn't say blah, blah, and then you kind of go, actually, if I'm being triggered, there's something going on for me here. There's something in this for me to look at. And when I land on the true emotion, I experience it physically. When I connect with the heart of what has triggered me or upset me, or where I need to do the work, and if it's an honest response, I will feel it energetically. It'll often be accompanied by tears. I will feel it physically as a release. And it'll sometimes present itself, and I'm going to use as a prayer, as a thank you for showing me the truth. So it's so multifaceted. It is exactly, you know, my framework is very similar to what you described.
Yeah.
B.
And in that sitting with your emotion, for example, you are also sitting with a part of yourself. Because if something triggers you, then it's like, I totally agree. It's so easy to say, oh, like he or she did that, and then this made me all upset. Nobody put that emotion. That person didn't put that emotion into me. That wound was already there somehow. It was just, it presented itself because of whatever the exchange was. But behind that hurt often is a small child or a teenager or a young woman. Or so to really meet these parts and sit with them in that sacred, honorable way, and in a really gentle way, because that part is hurting. And to acknowledge that and to hear that story, you know, of that part, I find really important as well. Yeah.
It is most often our wounded inner child, the vulnerable part of us, the fearful part of us.
Yeah.
And you're right, the one of the most challenging things is to embrace that child.
Mm.
Especially when there's so many cultural behaviors that are expected from us. You know, vulnerability is kind of, well, I'm going to reframe that. Vulnerability is emerging as a very positive characteristic, but I think vulnerability has been, by society, it hasn't been a characteristic that has been welcomed. Mm-hmm. But I'm seeing more in the language of media and stories where, and even around leadership training, where vulnerability is being embraced. But the challenge for all of us is to be vulnerable with ourselves and honest with ourselves, because it's so easy to deflect. It's so easy to avoid.
And not own our shit.
And not own it.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about what does sitting with it actually mean, sitting can't be rushed. Sometimes you need a few days because things happen at different levels. You'll be working with it intellectually, and then you might go for a walk in nature and something will just click. So there's something else will happen and it'll be brought on by a change of environment or something that connects with you in nature. You might have a conversation with someone that helps you reflect what's going on. Mm. And it's not something to be rushed. There's no race to get to the answer here. It's the beauty of it is actually in the process.
Mm. And in the layers of it as well. Like
and there are layers.
In every layer that you fall through, in a way, even though it's easy to go like, oh damn, I've dealt with that. Why am I going that circle again? But you know, there's a teaching in all of these layers and an understanding in all of these layers as well. So
yeah,
you have patience with yourself.
Some things you can kind of sit with and process quite quickly.
Yeah.
And other things, the deeper it is, the more you've avoided it, the more it speaks to our own individual vulnerability, the more time and care and gentleness needs to happen.
Mm.
And it's so hard when we're all in this race to just
really,
get there. Just give me the silver bullet. Just tell me what it is.
Yeah. And sometimes an emotion or a feeling might be really big and overwhelming. It doesn't mean that you have to sit by yourself. You know, you might have a friend that you really trust that just is able to sit there with you without pulling you out or changing anything that's going on. Or like I sometimes saw my therapist, and he would just sit there with me while I was breathing through all of these emotions that arise. But because I knew he was sitting there, it sort of held a space for me to really drop into all of that. And, you know, you don't only have to do it by yourself, but it is something that is wonderful to do by yourself as well.
Yeah.
It's a good tool in the toolbox. Yeah.
In listening to talk about having someone witness or hold the space, for me, when I've experienced that, it's just that power of the energetic release. So whether that's, you know, you coming at it from an energetic or a spiritual or there's definitely something in that energetic release, because emotions they have energy, right? And they can have a hold on us. So yeah, it's quite powerful to allow those emotions with somebody who you trust.
Yeah.
And go into it, because it can be quite terrifying, especially if it's something you've been avoiding for a very long time.
Yeah. I find breath always really helpful too, like that sacredness of the breath that you bring to, let's say, the pain that you're sitting with at the moment, and just breathe into it and breathe into it. And sometimes I might place my hands on certain parts as well, and yeah.
I tell you what I'm really aware of, and it goes back to what you started saying, B, which was the privilege of sitting.
Yeah.
Like I really love how you phrased that, the privilege of sitting, because it implies not only a companioning of yourself, but a real deep honoring of the parts of you, or the totality of you, really, not the parts, the totality of you, in all your rawness, in all your realness. And when I sit into privilege, you know, it led me into the inquiry of, and then you started to, you said who, because I was thinking, okay, if I'm sitting like this in this privileged space that I've allowed myself to be in, or invited myself to be in, or maybe I've just fallen into it accidentally, like the accidental sitter. Who am I actually sitting with? And you were talking about your, you know, like a trusted friend, and then there was the conversation about, you know, the trusted therapist, you know, the friend who can sit with you and not have to solve anything, not have to rescue anything, not have to make it better, not have to make it less messy, because that's the other part, that's the other distractor to sitting, is people try to make it be all right.
Yeah.
You know, and that's like, just
for you.
Yeah. You know, let's just put the Band-Aid there. And I understand that comes from compassion and kindness and love, but really it's not helpful.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, that's an important piece of that. And that's what therapists do well, and, or the wise guides, you know, because we learn just to be with you, however you are in that moment, until that moment opens to the next moment. And I think that's a way to learn the power and the privilege of sitting, you know, so that those doors can open, you know, tap, tap, tap. We were talking about this in class the other day. Tap, tap, tap. Let me open that door a little bit maybe, or let me just hear the tap and then sit with the decision, you know, do I want to open that door? But as I listened to you both speak, you know, where I went was back to, who am I sitting with when I sit? You know, for me, the way I do it is I'm sitting with the ancestors. I'm sitting with the Almakua, you know, which in English is like, you know, your personal guides, your personal guardians, your helpers. Yeah. I'm sitting with them. You know, I'm explaining to them, hey, this is so painful and I don't know why. Or I ended up over here in this situation. I don't know how I got here. You know, so I think part of learning to sit is also that sacred circle that you open, that has, you know, all those layers, a physical layer, a mental layer, but truthfully, it's at this, however you start doing it, the sitting happens at the spiritual, I'm pointing up again, should be this way, this way, the spiritual level. You know, and I love that. That's what holds me. And even as I'm speaking now, I can feel it right in my solar plexus.
And I find that, which is really what you were saying, but just to name it as well, that nature is such a wonderful companion. You know, all our relations out there in sitting with whatever comes up for you. And especially, I think if you build a relationship with a being, whether that's a tree or, you know, some being that you visit on a regular basis, and you have built that relationship, to just sit there. And it's incredible how you then, you know, get all these signs. Something might, a branch might break, and you might relate that with what's going on within yourself. A leaf might fall down, and it might speak to what's going on for you. It's then nearly like there is that communication with that other, with that brother or sister out there. And it's like an exchange of medicine, nearly, in all of that. Just like a tree breathes out, and I breathe in, and I breathe out, and the tree takes on of what my exhale breath was. There's that organic exchange, nearly, in a way, and as more as you can feel yourself being part of that, as more the communication will be, you will be aware of these communications that are happening everywhere as well. Because
when we're able to sit in sitting without intellectualizing it, what happens is exactly that, is we forget our separateness. Because, you know, people didn't live in their apartments. They didn't live in their, you know, head box. We're designed to live as part of the environment that we live in, that we experience in. We're designed to be part of it, not it's there, like nature's over here and I'm over here, and you have brief encounters with it. You know, in our understanding, that's right. You know, it's relational. It can't function at its optimum if we don't. And there's a concept. Because the relationship is, you know, like you were doing with your hands there, Christina, it's all part of the one, you know, it's all part of the one thing. And I think that is what being able to sink into these moments of sitting, whether we're actually sitting or it's a movement, you know, we're walking somewhere. But we're doing it with the intention of, hey, hello, something's going on here. I think you can just as much walk with something than you sit with something. You know, like you, Standing Bear always says, walk with it. Just walk with compassion, or walk with your anger, and it really speaks to me as well. So it's. Well, we have. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, but it's very similar to the sitting, in a way. Yeah. Because we have in the school, in one of the courses, we do, and in fact, we just shared it the other day on Instagram, of this whole idea of how silently can I move through life? How silently can I walk in life? Can I walk through a space? And a walk is not necessarily physically walking, it's really about movement. How silently can I move in a space? And what do you notice that goes on when you move that way? And what you notice is, all of a sudden, you're not moving as your physical outline, you're moving as everything else is moving. And it's such a wonderful, simple, because it doesn't require you to do anything, experience of that whole thing you're talking about, like other, and the connection and the relationship of that.
And being in flow.
Exactly. Because you are part of that flow.
But how often do we feel that we're not in flow? I think for many of us, with the way lives are, and okay, maybe less so now, we're a lot of us are in lockdown. But I think there are many times, certainly from my experience, that I've set the intention of being in flow, but I haven't been in flow. I haven't.
Because it's a discipline as well.
Correct.
Like when you recognize, you know, that's part of the training.
Correct.
You know, I feel that you're not in flow. I feel misaligned. I feel separate. I feel brittle. However you come to know that, because then it's the intention of, okay, when I feel like that, now I know what to do. I can just sit in that.
Exactly.
And the overstimulation of our outward senses, you know, the hearing, smelling, seeing, in this, the way we use senses in the Western world, it's complete overstimulation so often. I really get it when I go away and I'm camping for a week or 10 days, where you really are immersed in, you know, going to bed when the sun goes down and waking up when the birds sing, and you walk out of that place again. It's like, oh my God, like that's when I really often realize how overstimulated we are on a daily basis with deadlines and with advertising and with cars and with people and with mobile phones and all of it. And so that stops us then from being in connection with our inner senses, you know, the intuition, the sensing, the seeing with your inner eye, and those kind of things, I find. So getting away for 10 days and then coming in, that's when I always realize it is.
Yeah, but is it that? Is it overwhelm, or is it something else that prevents us from living in that space? Because, you know, in spiritual training, well, the way that we do it, you know, that's what it's about. 24/7. 365, you know, not, okay, do it over there, but now I can't translate it over here.
Now, I'm not saying you can't, but it definitely is a challenge. You know, you have kids, you have got a job, you have got deadlines. So it's a real challenge to make space in all of that craziness where you
to integrate.
Yeah. And I'm not saying it's not doable and all of that.
But that's my question, you know, we're talking about sitting in, and now we know what it is, and we've even got some ways to do it. And we know the value of it and the love that's present in there. Why don't we do it?
So that's a good conversation, and I reckon that's a whole nother session. It's a brilliant question, right? So why don't we? If we all know the value of it, if it's so amazing, if we feel so phenomenal, if we feel so connected, if everything is so amazing, why do we choose to step out of that?
You know, why don't we live seasonally? You know, what happens in the environment, you know, seasonally, not by the calendar, the 1st of August or the 20th of August, but the season within that time period.
So it's interesting you should mention seasons, because I was sitting with that today and kind of observing what's been happening for me the last 2 or 3 months. And I've been a bear in hibernation. And normally I would have been very judgmental of that. I should be doing, I should be in action, I should be making things happen, I should be driving, it should be fire, it should be. If I kept that up 12 months of the year, I'd be flat out on my back or very, very unwell. And I actually, for once, I was able to be gentle with myself and say, yes, I have been a bear, and it's important because I need to recharge for the next season. And if I was running 1,000,000 miles an hour, then I couldn't be who I'm meant to be in this world in a gentle way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think seasons, another great conversation in terms of.
Yeah. And really Standing Bear always talks about decolonization. You know, it's so much of our culture is built on all of that as well, to be as busy as possible. Like if somebody says, I'm so busy, then it's like, oh, he must be doing, you know, he's good on him that he's working so hard. And it's a complete wrong concepts around.
And some of that's avoidance.
Yeah.
Some of that's avoidance for some people.
Well, I think it's built on fear. You know, it goes further than that. It goes, if you're talking about people that are in workplaces, and especially, you know, the multinationals, that's around that, all that kind of culture is rewarding fear. Oh yes, I have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning because of the time difference. Do you know what happens if I don't do that? You know, if we keep following that, it'll come back to some level of fear. You know, it's about what gets rewarded. But if you really unpack it, you know, pull all those Lego pieces apart, I'm pretty certain we'll find names of things that are linked into what is feared. Oh, I'm going to fear losing market share. Oh, I'm going to fear, you know, the next Amazon or whoever it is, you know, coming up behind me. They reward destructive behaviors. And that's why, you know, I always take my hat off to people that can hold their spiritual essence and all that means, and be in those, what I call cells of inhumanity, because I couldn't do that. I couldn't.
Yeah. And all that's, you know, a lot of that's very, very complex stuff, because you're right, it's fear, it's also people playing out their own strong suits on misguided, in my world, foundations. It's like that pursuit of money above all else, that whole concept of, well, you can't have heart and profit at the same time. It's like, it's almost like there's this either or, and that drives a lot of those behaviors that you were just describing, Julia. And I think it's time for that paradigm to be shifted. I believe we can have heart-led leaders and make heart-led decisions and still have prosperity for all. I really believe that. And I think it's time to change it's time to retrain our leaders.
Because it's about power. You know, all that stuff is about power over. And so really, you know, power over and power and how we hold it is still about fear. But you're right, we do have to change. And that, you know, there are lots of examples of successful organizations, big, small, whatever, that are operating that way. Like our own one, the SoHAD, seeks to operate from that social perspective, that inclusiveness, the collectiveness. You know, the SoHAD isn't about any one person, but about all of us.
I think we've got some fabulous conversations to have. I'm conscious of our time and the time of those viewing with us. But I think we've got some fabulous next conversations to have out of this conversation.
So where are we with sitting in? You know, what's your takeaway, Bea?
I think to expand, to be really aware now where I'm sitting and expanding that space of sitting, like that's something that is sitting on my shoulder at the moment.
Yeah, I'm thinking what my takeout is. I think a lot of it is to allow whatever it is that's going on for you just to happen, and be gentle with yourself, be compassionate.
And mine is coming back to that, consciously deciding to take time out, whether it's 1 minute, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's an hour, just to feel what it's like to not have to say anything. Because to me, we've got to start. And I think, you know, start with the intention of, I have permission just to sit here and feel something, whatever it is, till I feel I can't sit there any longer, because either it's becoming overwhelming or I'm feeling vulnerable, or, you know, something's moving that requires me not to sit there anymore. That's what I would take away. Just start sitting. And see where sitting takes you. Experiment, have fun, hold things lightly. And don't forget, people, in all of this sitting, you know, sitting's highly transformational. I think that's what the wise guides have been getting at today. You know, it can lead you into all sorts of inner explorations and inquiries. And that's where the wise guides really come into their own. So if you don't have a helper to help you sit, to help you explore, to hold you while you go through whatever it is you need to go through, the wise guides are your go-to, and you can book them at any time. There's 5 of them so far, and you can find them on our SoHAD website, www.spiritualhealingcourses.com. You then go to the Learn tab. You'll see the Wise Guides tab sitting there, and then you can select your favorite Wise Guides. All of the sessions are confidential. All of the sessions are online, and they're available to you when you need it. Anyone want to add anything finally?
No, it was wonderful sitting with all of you today.
Yeah, and I just want to once again acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're sitting. So I'm sitting on Gadigal country today.
I'm sitting on Wadawurrung country today.
And Darkinjung country.
Ahui ho.
Yachikohan.
Tschüss.